Okay, so this time you've sent us something pretty intense, a diary entry, all about a sitcom script it's causing some real issues behind the scenes. We've got expert speaker here with us today to help us unpack this one.
I'm ready. Let's hear it.
Okay, so we've got Esme, who's a TV director, and she finds her wife, Desi's latest script for this show. No pigment, no problem. And well, she's not exactly thrilled about it. And this show is kind of a big deal, right? It's like the first show that really shows characters with vitiligo and albinism.
I think I see where this is going. It's like that classic creative freedom versus controversy dilemma. What kind of humor are we dealing with here?
So like one scene has a character trying to literally like burn off her vitiligo spots on a stovetop.
Yeah.
And then another has two albino characters kind of making, well, let's just say some pretty insensitive comparisons about who has it worse. Esme's even worried about kids, trying to copy that stove scene.
Yeah, okay. I can definitely see why that would be a concern. It sounds like it's definitely pushing the boundaries of comedy a bit.
Right. And to make it even trickier, this show is literally the only YAPY show representing this kind of diversity. So it's got like this huge responsibility to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Representation matters a lot. And when you're the first one to do something like that, all eyes are on you for sure. But I think it's important not to jump to conclusions too quickly. Comedy, especially satire, it often uses exaggeration and things that might shock people at first to get a conversation going.
Yeah, I get that. But there's got to be a line somewhere, right? Esme even suggests bringing in like a consultant with vitiligo to help with the script. But she's worried Desi's going to see that as censorship, which honestly I kind of get.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that for sure. Consultants can bring really valuable insights to the table, but you don't want to stifle the writer's voice either. It's all about finding that balance.
And it gets even more complicated.
Yeah.
Because Esme mentions that Desi already feels like her work is constantly being heteronormalized by other writers. It's like she's fighting this uphill battle for authentic representation.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. It's super frustrating when you feel like your experiences are being watered down or sanitized to fit into some mainstream narrative. It's important to honor those unique perspectives.
So how do we make sure that happens? How do we support Desi's creative freedom while also recognizing that this script could have a real impact? Like, I'm reading this and thinking, what would I do if I were Esme? It's tough.
I mean, it's a tricky situation for sure, but let's maybe take a step back for a second. Think about shows like South Park or even The Office. I mean, they've tackled some pretty sensitive stuff using satire, right? It can be done, but it takes a lot of skill and you really got to know your audience.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. But those shows have been around forever. They've got a built-in audience who kind of trust them to handle things the right way. No pigment, no problem. It's still new. It's still finding its feet.
That's true. But imagine the impact if they can pull it off. If they can use humor to really challenge people's perceptions and get those conversations going about these conditions that people don't often talk about, I mean, that would be huge. It could open doors for other shows to do the same thing.
You're making me think about this in a whole new way. What if instead of focusing on the potential harm, we look at the potential good?
Exactly.
But I'm still kind of stuck on that stovetop scene. Even if it's supposed to be satire, doesn't it kind of risk normalizing self-harm?
It's definitely a bold choice, I'll give you that. But context is everything. We haven't seen the whole script. Just Esme's take on it.
Oh, right. Good point. Esme even mentions that the character ends up learning a lesson about self-acceptance. Maybe the humor comes from how absurd the whole situation is, like the desperation to fit in with these societal standards.
Exactly. It's like she's holding up a mirror to all those unrealistic beauty standards and saying, look how ridiculous this is.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see how it could work. But what about that scene with the albino characters? Esme was really worried about that one, especially since, they'd just gotten engaged.
That's where the writer's skill really comes in. Desi has to walk a fine line using humor to expose those internalized biases, but without reinforcing harmful stereotypes.
So it's not about avoiding potentially controversial topics. It's about handling them with nuance and sensitivity.
Exactly. Think about shows like Atlanta or Insecure. They've really changed the game in terms of representation by tackling these tough conversations with humor and honesty.
Wow, this whole diary entry has really got me thinking. I have a friend with vitiligo, and I never really considered how this kind of representation might affect her.
That's the power of art, right? It can make us see the world through someone else's eyes, challenge our assumptions, and start those important conversations.
Okay, so maybe I was a bit too quick to judge Desi's script. But Esme still has a right to be concerned, doesn't she? I mean, she's not just a worried wife. She's a director who gets how powerful storytelling can be.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where open communication is so important. Esme needs to talk to Desi about her concerns, but not from a place of censorship, from a place of love and wanting to collaborate.
So more like, hey, honey, I get what you're trying to do here, but maybe we can explore some other ways to approach it.
Exactly. Maybe they can brainstorm some ideas together, workshop some things, or even just bring in a consultant as like a sounding board.
But wouldn't that be like Esme overstepping her boundaries? I mean, Des is the writer at the end of the day.
It really depends on their dynamic as a couple and as creative partners, but I think they both want the show to be successful, right?
Right.
This could be a chance to make their bond stronger, both personally and professionally.
You know what? You're right. Instead of seeing this as a conflict, you can see it as a challenge to tackle together.
And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting. We're not just talking about a sitcom script. We're talking about relationships, communication, and all the complexities of navigating those creative partnerships.
This deep dive has definitely taken some unexpected turns. I started out feeling kind of appalled by this whole thing, but now I'm actually intrigued. I'm seeing the potential for something really groundbreaking. So we started out like, what is going on here? And now I'm kind of like, okay, maybe this could work. But it all comes down to whether Desi can really pull this off. Can she use these jokes that could be really offensive and actually make a powerful statement without, hurting people?
Yeah, that's the big question. And honestly, I think she can. Look, comedy is subjective, right? What one person finds offensive, someone else might find hilarious. And even like, it makes them think.
But doesn't Desi have like a responsibility to think about how this might affect her audience? Especially people who actually have vitiligo and albinism.
Of course. But being responsible doesn't mean you have to play it safe. It means pushing those boundaries and challenging norms and getting people talking. Sometimes the most uncomfortable truths are the ones you gotta deliver with a little bit of humor.
I don't know. I'm still kind of hung up on that stovetop scene. It just feels so real, so potentially damaging, even if it's supposed to teach a lesson about self-acceptance.
I get it. But think about it this way. Desi's using a really shocking image to highlight a real problem. The pressure to fit in with these crazy beauty standards. She's not saying self-harm is okay. She's showing how desperate people can get when they feel like they don't belong.
Okay, I can see that. But what about the scene where the albino characters are comparing themselves? That just feels like it could turn these communities against each other.
I see what you mean. But again, it all comes down to how she writes it. What if Desi uses that scene to show how complicated identity can be within these marginalized groups? What if it's a commentary on how we can have these biases even in our closest relationships?
You're really good at finding the good in this. I gotta admit, I'm kind of starting to get excited about what Desi might create. But what about that scene with the priest? That one just felt wrong.
Yeah, telling someone they're cursed by God is pretty intense. But remember, satire uses exaggeration and irony to show hypocrisy. What if Desi's using that scene to criticize those old-fashioned religious beliefs that make people feel ashamed?
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
It's like she's taking those hurtful words and throwing them right back.
Exactly. It's about taking back your power, challenging authority, and using humor to fight back against oppression.
This has been such a wild, deep dive. I thought we were dealing with some seriously messed up humor, but now I'm seeing how this could be something really powerful.
That's the amazing thing about art. It makes you think, it challenges you, and it makes you see the world in a whole new way. And honestly, I think Desi can handle this with sensitivity and intelligence.
But what about Esme? She's obviously having a tough time with this. What advice would you give her?
I think Esme should talk to Desi honestly, but not try to censor her. Just come from a place of love and support. Encourage Desi to think about how people might interpret it, how it could affect the audience and the responsibility she has representing these communities.
But shouldn't Esme be more forceful? Like, what if Desi won't change anything?
It's not about making Desi change her vision. It's about creating a safe space for them to talk and work together. Maybe they can brainstorm, bring in a consultant, or even just agree to disagree.
You know, you're making me rethink how I deal with conflict. It doesn't always have to be a fight. It can be a chance to learn and grow.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about. It's not about finding easy answers. It's about exploring these complicated issues, challenging what we think we know, and embracing all the messy parts of being human.
So well said. What do you think, listener? Are you Team Esme worried about Desi's script? Or are you Team Desi excited to see how she uses humor to challenge everyone?
Whatever you think, remember, this art is supposed to make you feel something, make you think, and make you question things. And sometimes the stories that make us squirm are the ones that have the most impact.
So keep sending us those diary entries. And don't be afraid to dive into the stuff that makes you uncomfortable. You never know what you might discover.